Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 56, I think, of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half. You can follow me on Twitter at halfandhalf_TPL. And I'm joined tonight by the two best co-hosts that we could ask for. That's right, Dibes got a promotion. He's thrown into the best co-host category. We've got Dibes at Mr. Crockpot on Twitter. We've got Mark Henry Jr. _ on Twitter. You guys give them a follow. We are here tonight. We are going to be breaking down our Eagles big board. So if you are not an Eagles fan and you follow this podcast, don't tune us out. We're going to be talking about a lot of guys that are going to go in round one. But specifically tonight, as we've wrapped up our positional rankings, we wanted to talk Eagles big board. So we're going to be ranking our top 18 guys. But before we get to that, Dibes, Mark, how are you guys doing tonight?
Dude, I'm stressed. I'm like, I don't know if it's like Sixers fatigue or we're nearly a week away from the NFL draft. Like, I can feel the pressure building like crazy, man. I'm stressed.
I spent all day today working on this massive spreadsheet that we're going to use on our draft show, and we're going to release it to the public with our big board rankings and a whole bunch of other data that I've been tabulating together. So I'm not quite done with it, but before the draft, hopefully early next week, we're going to release that out. So you guys keep an eye out on that. We're going to use one tab of it tonight, but the rest of it's going to stay under wraps until we're ready to release it. But Mark, how about you? How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm with Dibes. The Sixers, we've got them every other night in the playoffs. That's going to take years off my life, even though it's been 2 blowouts. But, and then obviously what we're here to talk about, what are we 9 days away, 8 days away from the NFL draft next week.
Crazy.
So, 2 first-round picks for the Eagles. We're obviously on edge for that. We got the draft show that sheet Shane talked about. I spent about 2 hours on today just messing around and tinkering with my rankings. So, I'm absolutely pumped. One of the best times of the year right now.
The sheet is legit, guys. Like, Shane worked his ass on this thing, man. That is as detailed as it gets. I can't wait for everyone to see that.
It's gonna have all 3 of our top 100-ish. It's gonna have other public big boards like the Draft Network, the Ringer, PFF. Their big boards. It'll have a consensus ranking, averaging all of those out. It's got all the combine, pro day, the relative athletic scores. It's gonna be pretty cool. It's gonna be nice to follow along with live on the draft. Those of you that followed along with the draft last year, we had a sheet. It wasn't this detailed. But we're going to have, bigger and better this year. That's the theme, as long as we have time to put it all together. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We are here to talk Eagles big boards. We're going to be ranking our top 18 guys specifically for the Eagles. So, spoiler alert, you're going to see there's going to be some top guys, like some of the offensive tackles that are unquestionably top 5 players in the draft that are not going to be seen early tonight. And that's just because it doesn't fit the Eagles' needs. So, Eagles-specific big boards, we're just going to talk about them like 4 guys at a time, compare notes. We've got some guys that some of us are higher on than others. We'll get into some of that. But let's start it off here, and I'll share my screen. And so we're going to start tonight. We're going to go from 1 to 18. Typically, we work backwards, but these guys at the top of the list, they're kind of consensus top of the class. And to be honest, they're probably not going to be there for the Eagles. And so we figured it would be anticlimactic to end with Kyle Hamilton and Kayvon Thibodeaux and Sauce Gardner and Aiden Hutchinson as our last guys. So we want to work down into those more realistic targets. So we've got our lists here. Across the board, we have the same top 4. The only difference being that Dibes and Mark have Sauce Gardner, the cornerback out of Cincinnati, number 3, while I have him 4. And then we're flipped on Aiden Hutchinson, who I have at 3, and Dibes and Mark have at 4. So, guys, let's just talk about this bucket here. Obviously, how many backflips would you do if the Eagles get one of these guys on draft night?
I mean, looking at my top 3, Hamilton, Tibbs, and Gardner, like those are the top 3 on my list in my tier that I would 100% trade up for. to land for the Philadelphia Eagles. There's been some rumors here that Hamilton might fall a little bit, which is absolutely absurd to me. Hamilton wasn't my number one at the start of the process. It was always Kayvon Thibodeaux. He was always consistently my number one guy. Gardner was really high, always on my list. And this is not a knock on Aiden Hutchinson whatsoever. I think these top four here are 100% studs, very safe picks. I think these are all pro level talent. So all four of these guys are studs.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dibes, though, what he initially said there with the tier of three. So for me, Kyle Hamilton, Kayvon Thibodeaux, and Ahmad Gardner, I do think prevent a little bit higher of an upside than Aiden Hutchinson to me. So I've kind of been, a little bit iffy on Jacksonville, taking him at one and kind of ignoring a lot of the other potential avenues that they could take there. But Kyle Hamilton, he's the best safety by far that I've ever graded in terms of NFL draft coverage, at least dating back to 2014 when I really started, really grading guys. And Kyle Hamilton, it's hard to really compare him to anyone other than Ed Reed, Derwin James. Derwin James, in my opinion, is an extremely conservative comparison, and he's one of the best safeties in the league. I think the things that Kyle Hamilton's able to do, you just have to watch that Florida State game. I always go back to that. The first game of his junior year at Notre Dame, it was unbelievable. He had 2 picks, but the one pick is the best play I think I've ever seen a defensive back make. I don't think I've ever seen a play that encapsulates what a player is more than that and what a player's instincts and IQ are. Kayvon Thibodeaux is a different kind of, case. He's just an absolute freak show. The guy is, when I see him, I see Chase Young. I think that he's got a lot of Chase Young in the way that he can impact the game in terms of rushing the passer and also being a run stuffer. So I think that there's, absolutely all pro potential. Like Dive said, I think even with those top 2 guys, I think there's, Hall of Fame potential there. There's Canton potential there. And then with Sauce Gardner, Aiden Hutchinson, I think that brings us to a nice, an interesting conversation here. So me and Dibes ended up ranking Sauce Gardner at 3rd, and Shane ended up ranking Aiden Hutchinson. I guess I'll ask Shane. I'll put the host pants on here and ask Shane the question. But Shane, what made you put Hutchinson over Gardner? Was it a close decision for you, or was this something where that's a top 3 and Sauce is outside of that top 3? Kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, those guys are really close for me. So on my board here, if Kyle Hamilton and Kayvon Thibodeaux, if either one of them are on the board at 8, I would look to move up there to get them. I wouldn't look to move up quite that high, probably for Hutchinson and Sauce. If they get 9, 10, where it's a little bit cheaper. So they're just a half step below for me, my top 2. Now, between Hutchinson and Gardner, I think they're both phenomenal players. They both have sky-high potentials. It ultimately comes down a little bit there for me with positional value. Yeah. I value the edge position a little bit more than corner, specifically in the context of the split field safety scheme the Eagles are moving into. I think safety becomes more important. Your defensive line being able to win becomes more important, especially in the run game, which we'll talk about a little bit later with one of the guys that I'm higher on than you guys are. And I think cornerback becomes a little less important. And so, in terms of who's the better player, that's really hard to say across positions. In my overall big board, I do still think I'll have Hutchinson a little higher than Sauce, but mostly it just comes down to that positional value for me between the 2.
I fully agree with everything Shane just said. I think Gardner's an incredibly safe pick. That's why I put him at number 3. And given the Eagles' situation at that position, incredibly important. That's why kind of Hamilton has kind of leapfrogged Tibbs, because you look at kind of the Eagles, situation there at safety is a huge need. So I think I have my top 3 in the same tier, and I think I have Aiden Hutchinson in that next tier below, if that sounds crazy. And that's not a knock on him. I think he's going to be a star, but I think his ceiling is not as high as the first 3. And given everything we know about Howie Roseman, I want the sure thing. And I think that my top 3 over Aiden Hutchinson are way more sure things, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, the reason I went with Sauce is because I just think, I watched Sauce all year, and all year I thought that this guy would step right into being a top 20 cornerback at the next level. Like, I really think that Sauce Gardner is the type of guy where you plug him in, and I think he's the number 1 cornerback as a rookie. And, I don't know if Aiden Hutchinson will be able to, kind of dominate athletically in the way that he did in the Big Ten right away in the NFL. And with Sauce's length and his pterodactyl arms, like I think that he kind of is just a safer bet, like Dive said, but also a safer bet to produce right away. And when both guys do have such high upsides, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson's a guy with a 9.8 or 9.88 RAS. And Sauce Gardner, he doesn't have it because he didn't test out on a lot of the things. But these are both absolute freaks athletically, respectfully at their positions. So I went with Sauce Gardner. I actually, maybe it'd be an interesting podcast sometimes to kind of rank how we personally value positions. I don't know. Maybe that's a fun topic, or maybe just even like a draft bag or a draft mailbag question. But I think that'd be interesting. I don't have corner too far behind edge rusher in terms of how I value positions, but I certainly hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
Yeah, and I think a lot of time, and it becomes scheme dependent too. Mm-hmm. So in what position in that Jim Schwartz, that cover 3 scheme, cornerback would absolutely, like, I would have them flipped if Jim Schwartz was still the defensive coordinator. And I know, there was smoke about Gannon getting a head coaching job, so maybe he's gone next year, but you would have to think they're going to keep a similar system, so you don't want to tie it too much to that. But I feel pretty confident that those split field and those quarters looks, that's kind of where the NFL is headed in terms of eliminating the explosive plays from the offense. And so, that's where I'm at. I still view corner as very important. I just think it's not as important as it used to be, which sounds crazy in a passing NFL. But yeah, so we got a comment from Joe Ciccoletti here. Longtime Chalk Talk listener. He loves my Kyle Shanahan takes. He's talking about another Kyle here, though. Says that Kyle Hamilton, number 1 for the Eagles big board. What's up with that? I thought Mark was all in on a QB like Carson Strong. So, Mark, are we going to see Carson Strong in your top 18 here?
No, there will not be a quarterback in my top 18. Maybe there will be one in another top 18, but I don't have any quarterbacks in my top 18. I excluded the quarterbacks, but the only one that would have made it for me was Pickett if we were just talking about overall rankings anyway. I have Carson Strong as a fringe first round pick in terms of the rankings, which I'll probably be like the highest person in the industry at all. But Carson Strong, which I don't care.
Mark does take Carson Strong in the 3rd round of every mock draft he ever does.
Yeah, no, it's a locked in 3rd round pick for me.
I put out on Twitter, I think it was last week, as like, comment with your team or just a team you're interested to see a mock draft for, and I'll do a 4-round mock draft, Eagles excluded, because I've done a ton of Eagles stuff. And I realized that guy for me is Dylan Parham out of Memphis, because I mocked him to like 7 teams when people were asking. So it's like, hey, you could use an interior offensive lineman, take this guy. So I realized that's my day 3 guy, or that's my round 3 guy that I always take.
My day 2 guys, my day 3 guys, it's Christian Watson, 100%, Chad Muma, 100%, and then Jelani Woods. Those 3 guys you could probably find on my mocks that I do 1,000 times a day, at least 95% of the time.
Yeah,
Jelani. It is funny. I was just say I do that every year. There's always like somebody that's like, all right, I'm always taking that guy in the 3rd round.
Jelani Woods is definitely in that category for me as well. And then with the 2nd round or the 3rd round, Sean Ryan has been an O lineman that I've taken in a lot of my mocks. He's a day 2 guy that I'm pretty high on. There's other guys out there. I'm definitely Kirby Joseph's a day 3, day 2, day 3 guy. I really like a safety out of Illinois playmaker. I have a bunch of guys like that I go to. My 2nd round, I feel like I usually I try different things in the 2nd round. Usually, it's usually like a couple people we'll get to in this next slide in the 1st round for me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next bucket here. And if you guys are watching live, drop in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking about our rankings. If you've got questions about them, or you want to just tell us who you have, what your ideal 1st round is, go ahead and drop that in there for us. We're going to reveal here our next bucket, this is a 5. And so we'll just start with our number 5s here. I'll just read them down. So Dives goes 5, defensive end Trayvon Walker, 6, defensive end Jermaine Johnson, 7, cornerback Andrew Booth, 8, cornerback Derrick Stingley, and 9, defensive tackle Jordan Davis. I go at 5, corner Derrick Stingley, at 6, quarterback Malik Willis, 7, defensive tackle Jordan Davis, 8, wide receiver Treylon Burks, who I've been in a lot of Twitter fights about this week, and 9, defensive end George Karloftis. And then Mark has at 5, George Karloftis, 6, Andrew Booth, 7, Derrick Stingley, 8, Jamison Williams, and 9, linebacker Devin Lloyd. So we start to get a little bit of a difference here outside of that first group of 4, and you'll see that through the rest of these boards. So we can dive in and talk about this.
Let's kind of focus on 5 here, because it's all everyone's number 5 is a guy that we're highest on out of us 3. So let's talk about Dives number 5 first, Trayvon Walker. He's got Trayvon Walker in the top 5. If you notice, me and Shane don't have him here in our top 9s. So what makes Trayvon Walker a top 5 prospect for the Eagles for you? And it does seem like he's almost a part of that top 4 tier nationally at this point, where he's probably someone we don't have to worry about because he's probably going to be going in those first 5 or 6 picks. But, what do you see that you agree with those people?
Yeah, Trey Walker was on my ultimate boomer bust video that I made a week or 2 ago. This is a guy that's all about projection, 6'5", 275 pounds. He's got elite bend, great explosiveness, can drop back in coverage. Georgia utilized him in only like 33% of the snaps, which is crazy when you talk about a top pick like this. So for me, Trey Walker, it's all about ceiling. We're getting now to kind of the bones of the draft here, where you do have to kind of consider, the strength of the draft and, the Eagles' needs for sure. And I think the strength of the draft is the edge guys, the top edge guys, and you have the other one. After Karloftis here, there's definitely a dip where the edge position definitely falls down a cliff. And then same for corner. But speaking of Trey Walker, for me, I just think that this is a guy just with immense size and athleticism that I think Gannon will be able to kind of weaponize in just multiple alignments. And I think we're going to see that now that he's signed Hassan Reddick. And I think we're going to see a little more of that. We were kind of promised of that last year. We didn't see much of it. But I think this is the year that Gannon kind of hones in on that. And I don't even think he's going to be available for the Eagles. That would be a pipe dream. But again, projection-wise, I'm of the belief in the first round, you always take best player available. And I think Trey Walker has one of the highest ceilings of any prospect if it clicks. I think Trey Walker, his versatility on the line, dropping back, is absolutely insane.
So real quick before you get to that, Shane, just because I'm gonna ask you a 2-part question, kind of. But Trey Walker, for me, just a quick blurb on kind of why he's not in my top 9. I will get to him. The lack of production always scares me with defensive linemen, and there's a couple guys from Georgia, and I know that they do filter in guys a lot, but just in terms of watching their film and watching their pass rushing technique, there are a lot of things there that worry me with Trayvon Walker and another guy from Georgia, and I guess all 3 defensive linemen when I really break it down. But and I think that the main reason is you compare him to a guy like a Carloftus or even like a Jermaine Johnson. I think that those guys are guys that dealt with having the entire offensive line be like, our main focus is stopping this guy. Like Jermaine Johnson and George Karloftis faced a ton of doubles, and I know that they had all these snaps, but those are things that like guys like Walker, guys like Wyatt, and then Jordan Davis is a little different. Jordan Davis definitely dealt with doubles, so that's a little different. But Walker and Wyatt, they didn't ever have to be the main focus of the other team. So I do think it allowed them to thrive when they were kind of being put out there fresh as a daisy in the 30% of snaps. So those are the kind of things that concern me. But two-part question for Shane. What made you nervous or enough to leave Trayvon Walker outside of your top 9? And also after that, we all are high on Derrick Stingley, but what makes Derrick Stingley a top 5 guy for you?
Yeah, so the first part with Walker, it's the elite athleticism. Here's his spider chart. We all know This guy's an elite athlete. He blew up the combine. The concern for me is that in his 3 years at Georgia, he didn't combine to have double-digit sacks, 9.5 sacks in 3 years. And I know Georgia rotates their line. They do all of those different things. But when you put on the tape of Trey Walker, this is a guy that does not know how to rush the passer. He doesn't know what to do. He has no technique there. He's good against the run, which is good. But I'm not drafting a guy to be good against the run, in the top 5 of the draft, which is where I see him going. So the potential for him is sky high if he figures out the pass rush piece of the puzzle. I just can't put a guy that high that has such a huge piece of the puzzle to still finish out. So I'm with Dives. He's the ultimate boomer bust. He has a sky high ceiling, but I just can't be as in on a guy going that high. Like, I think it's insane if he goes off the board in the top 5. And I think he's going to, and I hope it's to the Giants as an Eagles fan. But I have big concerns just with that. Now, if he figures it out, he's going to be a monster.
Just, in retrospect, like I remember when this whole draft process started. When I started back in like December, like watching tape, ranking guys, Trey Walker was like a top 2nd round pick. Like he was not even close to being a top 10 pick. No one had him. There was no buzz about Trey Walker being this massive edge rushing prospect. And I remember talking to you guys on the chat groups, and like I saw it coming. Like when I did my video, like I saw it coming. I knew like once the Senior Bowl hit, once the Combine hit, like this guy would just absolutely skyrocket up. Same for Jermaine Johnson, which we touch on a little bit. But I saw it coming, and it sucks, man. You guys know I've been on the Trey Walker train for a long time, and it kind of sucks because I've done so many mocks where we get comments during my mock drafts about how like, Trey Walker at 15, Trey Walker at 16. Like, are you crazy? Like, he's now a legit like top 10 pick in this draft. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, and he is going to be in my top 18. I'd be thrilled if they got him, in that 15 or 18 slot. He's not going to make it there. And I do think the teams in the top 5 that take him, they're kind of crazy, especially if they're taking him over a guy like Thibodeaux, who seems to be falling.
I won't go as crazy to say I'd be happy to get him at 15.
Really?
We'll get to where he's at on my list, but I think there's a lot of guys in front of him that are pretty realistic to all be there at 15 and 18. So it's just going to come down to who's on the board. But we'll get that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Joe Chick has a good question, and it goes back to what I asked Shane about Stingley. 2 things with top 9 showing. Shane, why Willis at 6? We'll get to that. That's a whole conversation. And I see consensus Booth over Stingley. Why is that? Well, consensus is me and Dives. Dives has Booth at 7, and I have Booth at 6. You don't see Booth there in the top 9 for Shane. He does have Stingley 5, while we have Stingley both 1 slot behind Booth. So I'll go first, and then Dives can go, and then Shane can kind of really go in on Stingley because I know that that's his boy. So Andrew Booth is the guy that I've kind of fallen in love with most in this process. I feel like I've said that a million times. He's the guy where every time I look and every time I watch stuff and every time I, do research, I just keep, coming back to him and raising him up my board to the point where I have him here at number 6. I haven't seen many people have him in their top 6 overall. And, I really do try to kind of avoid groupthink a little bit and rank it based on how I have it. And every time I go back to grade him and every time I go back to look at certain things, I like Andrew Booth more. I like the aggressiveness. The people think that the way that he attacks the run, it can be a problem and he doesn't, break down and square up. And I get that. But I want a dog like that wants to be around the ball. Every time you watch Clemson tape, he is flying to the ball. Yeah. Like he just wants to be the guy who gets a tackle or the guy who makes the pick or the guy who breaks up the pass. And I get that can hurt you sometimes. And I get that some offenses can try to scheme against that. But I think at the next level, when he has better coaching too, and he's kind of in an NFL system, and I think that he fits perfectly in this Eagles scheme. I think that he's almost like I don't know if this is a great comp. I haven't spent too much time thinking about a comp, but I almost think he's like a taller Darius Slade a little bit. Like, because what's Darius Slade? What's Darius Slade's height? 5'10", 5'11". Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
I thought it was a little taller.
6 foot. 6 foot.
Yeah,
6
that was
foot?
more 6
Okay.
foot, 6'1".
6 foot. So I guess it's not that much taller. Andrew Booth's 6 foot. So, okay. Then Darius Slade's a good comp, I think. I think that he fits perfectly in the system in the same way that we saw Darius Slade kind of have his best season in a while last year in Philadelphia. And I think in great part due to the way that our system kind of does protect cornerback a little bit, and especially a cornerback that fits well in that type of scheme. And, I think you see some of the highlight interceptions Andrew Booth makes, and it's unbelievable. But Stingley, his freshman year tape is the best year of tape you'll ever see on a cornerback prospect. And I'm fully aware of that. And that's why I have him, number 7 overall. I really like the guy. I'd be in love with taking him at 15 or 18 or even, I think that he's an absolute stud. But there are just more concerns for me with Stingley than Booth. Like, I think Booth's floor is a lot higher than Stingley's just because of probably injury issues. And, there does seem to be murmurs about off the field stuff. I don't try to get too far into that. I'm not a private investigator, so I don't know what Derrick Stingley's off the field issues and motivation is. So I don't have too much interest there, but the injuries are a little bit concerning when they're lower leg injuries. And I heard that the one that people were still concerned about was from August. He was still nursing it from August after playing this year. And that was what Daniel Jeremiah said on Move the Sticks today. So that's a little concern. That's almost like James Harden's hamstring, which has been hurt for 2 years now. But it's an interesting conversation. So I think Booth's a lot safer. Stingley has a higher upside. I'm willing to concede that, but I still think Booth's upside's really high. That's why I'm kind of fine being wrong on this one. If Derrick Stingley ends up being Jalen Ramsey, which he could be.
Yeah. Just like in my board, I have, Sauce at number 3. The next tier is basically 2A and 2B when it comes to Booth and Stingley. You nailed it, Mark. I think Andrew Booth's ability to close in and his anticipation, his ability to position against receivers, it's elite, man. This guy's he's so fluid, just like Sauce. He's a great athlete. And then Stingley has those question marks. And no one can question that this is one of the most talented players in the draft, just like my next guy at number 9, Jordan Davis. I mean, if it clicks, you're talking probably top 20 potential player in the NFL in terms of just being a disruptive force on the defensive line. But for me, Andrew Booth, just like you said, is a safer bet. I like Andrew Booth because he's a ball hawk. He's a playmaker. The Eagles need one of those guys. And Stingley, not saying Stingley isn't, but I think Andrew Booth is more of a sure thing.
And real quick before I get to Shane to talk about Stingley, that's going to be like, I don't know if you guys are Jimmy Kimmel people at all, but he has the running joke about how he's, we're going to have Matt Damon on, and we run out of time. It's like, we'll eventually get to Shane on Stingley. Because I've played it like 5 times. But just 1 point for the Eagles, because I think that, we're talking about an Eagles big board here. Andrew Booth, I think one of the reasons that he fits so perfectly in the scheme, Gannon's whole scheme is about force them to beat you with death by a million paper cuts, force them to go underneath, force them to, we ad nauseum at times last year where they were playing so far off, but their whole thing is to not get beat deep and to not give up those back-breaking long plays. Andrew Booth played the most snaps among ACC cornerbacks without surrendering a 20-plus yard catch, 581 snaps last year. This is a guy who not only can he make those plays, but he's really good at not giving up big plays. And if he's susceptible to anything, maybe it is some underneath stuff, and maybe he is a bit too aggressive there. But I think in the Eagles scheme, I think that's much less of a problem.
Yeah, so for me, it goes back to 2019 tape on Derrick Stingley. Mm-hmm. It's the best cornerback tape you'll ever see, and it was from an 18-year-old true freshman in the SEC. This guy practiced against Jamar Chase and all these guys, Justin Jefferson, and it turned him into the player that he is now. Since then, he's only played 10 games over the last 2 years. He had some illness that wasn't COVID in 2020. 2021, he tried to play, played 3 games, and then he stopped his season, and he had the Linsfranc injury. To me, the concern with Stingley is how he's going to come off the injuries, which his pro day looked really good. Mm-hmm. And then, is he really engaged? Those off-field things that we can't quantify because I don't get to sit in a room and talk to the guy. So for the most part, I try to discount that when I look into my ratings, unless there's just something like glaringly obvious.
Did Laramie Laramie Tunsil's gas mask, did that drop him down a couple spots?
That was actually what popped into my mind. Like I was about to say, like if show up with a gas mask an hour before the
day
draft.
Oh my god, that draft moment will never be topped. Like I think that's the number one.
That was literally like 30 minutes before the draft started. But yeah, so for me, Stingley versus Booth, you're questioning the injury. You maybe question the football character. I don't know on that. So I tend to discount the things that I can't know, like medicals. And so if I'm looking at the player, I'm looking at the tape, I see an elite cover guy. And I think he's got all pro potential for, a 10-year career. Now, do the injuries concern me? Yes. And I like Andrew Booth as well. He's going to show up on my list, but he's got injury issues too that people don't talk about a lot that are kind of concerning. I mean, he started dealing with tendonitis his senior year at high school. He's had surgeries through college on a patella tendon. He's had surgery on a sports hernia. He's had a quad injury, a groin injury. Like he's played through a lot of it, but this is a guy that at 18, 19, 20, he's dealt with so many injuries. Like, is this guy going to hold? I think there's questions about both of those guys there. I think both of them are good players. I think Stingley has a much higher ceiling. How does his floor compare to Booth's? I don't know. It really depends on a lot of those medical things and some other stuff. But what I see on the field with Stingley, I love. I don't think he's going to be there either. He's going to go top. He's not going to make it past the Vikings.
The Vikings are going to take Derrick Stingley. No
yeah, I agree. Or Washington.
Wouldn't it be ironic to see the Eagles select Derrick Stingley and then he has to go up against Devontae Smith, who absolutely cooked his ass 2 years ago? Wouldn't that be funny?
But real quick to stick with Shane, just because you're not going to find me and Dibes. We need to move a little faster to get some of these guys in, but a guy that you're not going to find on me or Dibes' list, so I wanted to stick with Shane here. And this is like a whole conversation, but Malik Willis at number 6 for Shane. He's going to be the only quarterback you'll find on any of our list. I understand why I like Willis. The upside's really high. I decided to exclude quarterbacks and offensive linemen from my top 18 because I really don't want the Eagles to even think about taking either of those positions just due to so many of the needs that they have. And this comes down to quarterback philosophy. Me and Shane always kind of differ on, I think Shane thinks when you don't have the guy, you have to go get the guy. And I think I'm a little bit more patient with that. And I think that you can wait on that and you can build up assets. And I think that's what they're kind of doing. So Shane, why do you have Malik Willis at 6 for the Eagles? And then why do you like him so much as a prospect?
Yeah, so on my big board, as I go from 5 to 6, I leave the territory of guys that I would trade up for. Not trading up here to go get Malik Willis, but if he's there at 15, I would sprint the card in. You have I'm of the opinion you have the guy or you don't, and I don't think Jalen Hurts is the guy. I'm certainly willing to give him the chance as long as it doesn't involve passing over a guy like Malik Willis who falls into your lap at 15. And so if that happens, I'm making the pick. Malik Willis has elite athleticism. So he steps into the NFL week 1 of his rookie season, and he's the second best running quarterback in the NFL behind only Lamar Jackson. That gives you a certain floor. We talked about it last year with Jalen Hurts, that there's he may not, there's a high floor because of his running ability. If you want to scheme for Malik Willis in the running game, yes, he's got some accuracy problems. Yes, he's certainly has decision-making problems. Yes, he takes too many sacks. You can build that early Ravens Lamar offense around that if you need to mitigate that. This is not a guy that I want to come in and start as a rookie.
What I was going to say. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
At 15, I would certainly, you can call it an open competition. I would expect Hurts to be your starter week 1. But I just think the ceiling with Willis is so high if he figures it out. And I think the floor, it doesn't fall too low just because of that athleticism. So he's not a guy I would throw into the fire. He's a guy that I do believe in. I think a lot of it is going to depend on the coaching he gets, where he goes, and if he gets time to develop. I think if the Lions take him at 2, it's going to be a disaster. I think if the Panthers take him at 6, it could be interesting because they've got McCaffrey and they could do some creative things there. But considering their head coach, I think it would be a disaster. I think Sirianni could work with this guy. And I think when the time comes, he could give him a simplified offense to onboard. So I like Willis. I think his potential is sky high. He's got a lot to work on, but you draft him when you've got a guy like Hurts who is not going to go off the deep end like Carson Wentz did. He's going to go in and compete and try to win his job and keep it. It gives you time, and that's what Willis needs.
But you could literally just copy paste everything I said about Trey Walker and everything you just said about Malik Willis, and it's the same exact thing. So
But
why
quarterback is
not
so much
Trey
more
Walker on the same thing?
Because quarterback's the most important position in any sport. And there's not another quarterback in this draft that can do what Malik Willis can do. I think there's other defensive ends that can do what Walker can do. They're slightly less athletic, but
Yeah.
that's just
I would argue the edge position is just so much better than the quarterback. I don't even think it's close. That's just me personally. Like Malik Willis is probably not even in my top 30. And I think he's being way overrated in this draft. So,
Me too. I agree there, but I do see the upside. Like I get why there is excitement. It's the games where they play better competition, and I know that you have to take into consideration what he had around him. But the game against Ole Miss last year, I watched, and
it was so bad.
I was really excited to watch that game.
Me too.
To see Corral
Funny
and
story.
Willis.
So funny story about that. I actually was at the beach. I drove to the beach. I had to get to the bar. We literally get to the beach. I had to get to the bar at the right start time to watch that game, and he just shot the bed completely.
He was bad.
It was bad.
But I understand the upside. I don't think this is a guy who can play in his first year, especially coming from Liberty, from the level he did. This is a Trey Lance type, where the best case would be to sit him down for a year, and we'll see where he lands. But we'll talk more about that. I mean, that'll be a constant conversation. Me and Shane will yell at each other on the draft show about that, I'm sure. But let's get to another thing that we'll yell at each other about here. Shane's got Jordan Davis at 7. Dives has him at 9. This is a guy I don't have in my top 9. He will show up on my list in a little bit, but just real quick before I go to you guys on why you guys like him, I get why he's tantalizing. There's that's why he's on my list. I totally understand all of the greatness about what Jordan Davis can bring, but I think he might be a 2-down player. I don't know if he can be a 3-down player. He was only a 3-star recruit. He was a 4-year contributor, so that does kind of wash that away. He was a huge part of their national championship team. The reason that I'm not fully out on Jordan Davis, because I think there's a lot of reasons I'd be fully out, like with the pedigree as a 3-star prospect, with the lack of sack production. Only 7 sacks in 4 years, only 11 and a half tackles for loss in 4 years, only 1 pass deflected in 4 years when he was playing a decent amount, a little bit, at least in all 4 years, is the fact that when you watched Georgia's defense, Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean were the most obvious playmakers and difference makers on the field. I get all the measurables with players like Trayvon Walker, players like Devontae Wyatt, players like Lewis Seen, players like Quay Walker, players like Channing Tindall. It's crazy how many guys that they're going to have drafted probably in the first 2 days. But when you watched it, Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean were the 2 players who the other offense had to worry about the most. And that's why I understand all the things you're about to say on Jordan Davis. It's just the lack of pass. The same reason I said about Trayvon Walker. I'm worried about the lack of pass rushing skills from Jordan Davis. And I know it's a little bit less important for D tackle than it is for DN with Trayvon Walker, but that's why he's not in my top 9. Why? First with Shane, you have him at number 7 overall over 2 guys I know you really like in Burks and Karloftis. So what made you put him over those guys and a couple other guys that you have coming up?
So again, I'll go back to the Eagles scheme. You're going split field safety. That means you're taking a guy out of the box. You're now down 1 in the numbers in the box in the running game. So if you're going to be committed to playing that style of defense, you have 2 options. You can have your safeties attacking downhill hard in the running game. Well, the Eagles don't have any safeties, so that's not an option. Or option 2 is you've got to have a guy that can play 2 gaps. You've got to have a guy that can count for 2 people in the box. And Jordan Davis is that guy. Like, he's huge, he's fast, he's powerful, he's elite run defender. And so you look at guys that are elite run defenders and the power that they, the importance they bring to their team. You look at Ndamukong Suh in his prime and how impactful he was on the interior of the Lions defense. You look at why is the Bucs defensive tackle Vita Vea? You look at Vita Vea for the Bucs, and the impact that he makes. And I think Jordan Davis is that type of a player. I think he solves that numbers issue for you in a light box situation in the running game, which is something the Eagles were terrible at last year. And so is he a 2-down player? Maybe, but him being a 2-down player means that he's getting me into 3rd and longs, where I can take him off the field and I can go rush the passer and I can turn those edges loose. And so I hope he can develop to be a 3-down player, which is always going to be problematic at his size. But I hope he can develop that pass rush. But even if all he ever does is be an elite run defender on 1st and 2nd down and be able to push the pocket on passing plays, even if he's not a good pass rusher, he flattens that pocket a little bit and he opens it up for your edges. So I like that he solves the problem for you there in the running game, and he makes life a little easier on your edges.
Is it at least fair to say that he's pretty boom or bust? I think. Like I do think that there's definitely. Was he in your video, Dives?
He was not. I still think he's going to be probably one of the best
I think he's
defending nose tackles in the NFL.
Yeah. I would say he is boom or run defender. I don't think there's a bust necessarily there, unless health becomes a concern. But I would say he is boom or run defender. No, there's a chance he booms. There's a chance he's just a really good run defender.
But if he's a 2-down run defender that doesn't develop either the ability to play on 3rd down or the ability to pass rush, he probably shouldn't be a 1st-round pick, right? Is that fair to say?
It's fair.
I would take Vita Vea with a 1st-round pick.
Vita Vea, what's Vita Vea's sack production? Does he? I feel like he probably came out of college with sack production. I could be wrong here, but I'm just curious.
I don't know. I'll look it up while Dives talks here.
Yeah, let's move on to the next thing here. Jermaine Johnson.
Oh, here I got it. So in 4 years, Vita Vea has 11 sacks in the NFL.
11 and a half in 4 years, but he does have tackles for loss here. I'm curious what he has in college. Let's move on to the next thing here, though, while we're still in the top 7 here. Jermaine Johnson is a guy that Dives has in the top 7. Me and Shane don't have him until our next upcoming list here. Jermaine Johnson at 6. That's pretty high, Dives. I think that's probably higher than most people are. So what makes you so high on Jermaine Johnson?
Yeah, I fully agree. And I definitely think he's going to be in that probably 5 to 10 range of this draft. 100%. Just an extremely gifted athlete, just like Trey Walker here. He's got a little more polish, got a little more fundamentals than Trey Walker. He's definitely a better tackler than Trey Walker. He had 70 tackles last year. A lot of times you watch the tape on this guy, like he looks like a linebacker rather than an edge rusher there for Florida State. But this is one of those guys that has climbed the charts through the draft process, through the Senior Bowl, the Senior Bowl. He was absolutely dominant. I remember making a video before the Senior Bowl of guys to watch, and Jermaine Johnson was like number 1, and he dominated. Like he was so dominant during the practices. He practiced 2 days and stopped. That's how good he was. And then he did the combine. It was like everything about that guy, just like Trey Walker. These are kind of your typical, guys that rise, while George Karloftis and Andrew Booth and even though they're testing well, they're not flashy, sexy names that you hear a lot. So I like Jermaine Johnson though. I think he's an absolute stud.
Yeah, so you mentioned it, so it's a perfect segue before we go to our next part of our list. George Karloftis is a guy I have at number 5, who that's as high as you'll find him anywhere probably. Shane has him at number 9. I'm disappointed in Shane that he doesn't have him higher. And then Dives, he doesn't have him quite in the top 9. I'm even more disappointed in Dives. George is my guy. It's not. I don't know if either of you are Seinfeld guys, but I wish it was the summer so I could say it's the summer of George. It's the spring of George for me. And I really hope that the Eagles make it the spring of George. That would be an absolute dream scenario for me. I think he fits perfectly. I think he screams Howie Roseman. The versatile defensive lineman who can go inside, he can go outside, he can rush the passer, he can stop the run. I think he screams Howie Roseman. And there's, weirdly enough, I do think that there's a parallel with George Karloftis and Derrick Stingley. I think George Karloftis, you mentioned Derrick Stingley and the tape that he put out as a true freshman 18-year-old. George Karloftis did a very similar thing as a freshman at 18 years old in the Big Ten at Purdue. He had 8 sacks with 17 tackles for loss and 55 tackles in 12 games in his freshman year at Purdue. And that really shows you what George Karloftis can do, and he's not the main focus. Like that, as an 18-year-old, he came in and he wasn't getting doubled, he wasn't getting tripled, he wasn't getting focused on when you come in right away and there's no tape on you. And he showed what he can do. And I think when he gets to the next level, teams aren't going to be doubling George Karloftis as a rookie, and teams aren't going to be doubling George Karloftis in general because there's a lot of great defensive linemen in the NFL. So he's going to be facing a lot more single coverage than he faced in his senior year, or when he was 4.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and 39 tackles. I get that maybe the production did take a step back, but he still tested well, like Dives said, with a 9.18 RAS. I don't understand why this guy's falling. I love Karloftis. This is a guy where really that Karloftis and Booth 5-6 for me is the two guys who I've really, really fallen in love with the fit for the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think both make so much sense on this scheme. So I think we should move on to at least the next, because wide receiver is like a whole conversation in and of itself, I think.
As I say, we're halfway done and 46 minutes in, so we'll pick up the pace a little bit here. But I will say, off of my list, like I expect my 8 and 9, Burks and Karloftis, to both be available to the Eagles should they want to take them. I really don't think the top 7 are going to be there at 15. I'm not sure where you guys think your list will shake out, but I really think like Burks and Karloftis, the Eagles will definitely have shots to take those guys.
I think that the Eagles will definitely have shots to take Karloftis, Booth, and Lloyd on my board, potentially Jamison Williams. Jamison Williams, kind of an X factor, kind of a wild card in terms of where he's going to slot in the draft, I think. But there's a chance that they have a good chance to take 5, 6, 8, and 9 on my big board. But let's move on to the next slot. And I'm sorry, Dives, what's up?
Yeah, and I'm just, every time I watch one of these draft shows, a lot of people kind of knock Karloftis about not having the stats. And you already touched on it, but just want to reiterate, like the dude was, I followed every single game of his last year, and the dude was triple teamed every single game. And people, I don't know if enough people know that, even though like you don't look at the surface stats of George Karloftis, man. Just don't.
But even if you do look at it from his freshman year, like he had pretty good ones this freshman year. So it's not like this is a guy who never had sack production or never had that kind of production. So but you're right. He still dominated games last year. I tweeted out a clip today where he was getting doubled and it opened up something for someone else, and they forced a fumble. And while they doubled Karloftis, and then Karloftis broke 3 to pick up the fumble and run it back like 70 yards. And it's like, oh yeah, this is a guy with low, upside due to athleticism, even with a 9.18 RAS and running a 70-yard touchdown back. But yeah, I love Karloftis. I think he fits so perfectly. But getting to number 10 here, we have George Karloftis coming in at 10 for Dive, so he wasn't too far behind us. I'm not too disappointed. But Trent McDuffie at number 10 for Shane, and Drake London at number 10 for me. Let's talk about McDuffie. Let's talk about McDuffie, because Trent McDuffie's a guy who me and Dives won't have ranked on our top 18. Trent McDuffie is a guy who I think is a slot corner, and I think Dives is right there with me. Shane doesn't think so. Shane thinks he's an outside corner. So what makes you think he can fit in the Eagles scheme, and what makes you get past the Sidney Jones PTSD?
Yeah, I think for Trent McDuffie, obviously the Sidney Jones vibe there coming from the same school makes you a little scared sometimes, but I see Trent McDuffie, his arm size is a little concerning. That's really the only concern that I have, though. His tape is so good. He's so smooth in zone coverage, and he's good at coming downhill to tackle, which is also really important when you're taking a guy out of the box. So I think he checks those boxes for the Eagles. I think this is a guy the Eagles are really interested in. He's super smooth, high football IQ. Really the only concern with him is, can he stick outside? I think that he can. If I didn't think that he could, I wouldn't have him this high. I also think that if he doesn't fit outside, if he can't stick outside, I think he would be an elite slot, which isn't something the Eagles need right now. But I also think he could be a good safety. So I just think there's so many places that he could help you out. But I would be taking him here on the assumption that he is going to be able to stick on the outside. which is something I think he can do, particularly in quarters and split field safety schemes, which is what I think the Eagles are going to run a lot of.
And then I think the next conversation here is let's talk about linebackers, since Joe Chick dropped a comment here. It said, wow, Shane, no linebackers in the first 13. Shane is really soured on taking a linebacker for the Eagles. Howie Roseman has infiltrated his brain, and he can't consider a linebacker in the first round. For me, Devin Lloyd is kind of similar to Kyle Hamilton in the way that I do think that he kind of transcends the position of linebacker to being a guy that I would want to take in the top 10. I have him as my number 9 prospect for the Eagles for that reason, and I think that he would, slot right in. Now, I don't think the Eagles will take him, especially with their signings of Kaiser White, Hassan Reddick, who they're labeling as a linebacker sometimes. So I think that they think they've solved the linebacker position. I don't think they're going to address it on day 1 or 2 in the NFL draft if I had to make a guess. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't, because I think Devin Lloyd's a guy who you can plug right in for the next 10 years. And I think that he's a guy who I'm going to steal this from my friend Dives over there. I was really, really struggling with Devin Lloyd versus Drake London. That was a really, really tough debate for me. Jamison Williams has a little bit of an edge because I really think they need a receiver more than a linebacker. And I think he has, really, really crazy potential, which we'll get to. But Devin Lloyd is a guy who Dives said it best. He said, I think he's a guy who's got Hall of Fame potential, and I totally agree. I went back and listened to our linebacker ranking shows, and I was gushing over Devin Lloyd. It made it sound like he was like a top 7 pick, and I still think that even though I have even fallen on him a little bit, and a lot of people have fallen on him, I think he's went from being a no doubt top 15 guy to maybe a no doubt first rounder. He could go in the 20s now, but I would take Devin Lloyd, no doubt about it, at 15 or 18, and I'd walk away pretty happy.
This falls in that territory of I want a playmaker. The Eagles need to add playmakers, offense, defense. It kind of goes in that same boat of Jordan Davis. Like, the linebacker position is probably not the biggest need. I think the Eagles need to address cornerback, edge rusher. But for me, linebacker Devin Lloyd is got one of the highest ceilings probably in this entire draft. And the only thing he struggles a little bit is like shedding blocks, but he does it all, man. He does it all at a pretty elite level. And I would love to see the Eagles get him. And yeah, he'd probably fight for time with Hassan Reddick. I don't know like what Shane projects him as in the next level. But for me, Devin Lloyd, I think, is just a stud.
And then Nakobe Dean is a guy who neither of you guys have ranked. I have him at 13 just to close out the linebacker position for Joe. Nakobe Dean's a guy who I mentioned it with Jordan Davis. When you watch Georgia's offense, those were the two guys who stood out. And Nakobe Dean was the best player on the field at all times when he was on the field for Georgia. And I understand the positional value of linebacker, but I do think that he's a guy who that's going to transcend to the next level. I mean, he was a 5-star prospect. He was a top 20 prospect in the country coming out of high school. I think that he's an absolute freak, and it's funny. Tom McShay and Daniel Jeremiah went on Ryan Rustilla's podcast. Really interesting draft podcast. I suggest it for everyone out there. But and they kind of went back and forth, and they don't often do that because they're on 2 competing networks. And they were both kind of like joking around how everyone around them is falling on Nakobe Dean and doesn't think he should be a first-round pick, and all these NFL teams are calling them and telling him, well, it's really Trey Walker who's going to go in the first round over him.
That's crazy.
And it's crazy. But they're like, I mean, are we the only people in the world who still believe in this guy as like a top 15 pick? And it's like, no, I'm still there. So I'm still there on the Nakobe Dean too. So I believe in this kid, even if the positional, value is a little bit off there. But Shane, or should I say Howie, why do you not have any linebackers on the list?
Yeah, there'll be a linebacker at the tail end of my list here. And I really like Lloyd, and I like Dean. I like Lloyd more than Dean. I like them both. It's a positional value thing for me. I think the Eagles have bigger needs at corner and at safety, and I think those are more valuable positions. I wouldn't say they have a bigger need at edge or defensive tackle, but you look a year down the road, 2 years down the road, they have pretty big needs there too. Mm-hmm. So I like the Kazir White signing. I liked what I saw out of Davion Taylor in limited time last year. You're hoping, he gets healthy and you can bring him along. So I would not be upset if the Eagles walk out of the draft with Devin Lloyd. It wouldn't be my ideal preference, but I do think he's going to be a really good player.
All right, so before we move on to the next segment here, I think it's kind of dominated by wide receivers. A little bit of this one and the next one. I have all 4 of my top 4 wide receivers in this top 12 here, with Jamison Williams at 8, Drake London at 10, Treylon Burks at 11, and Chris Olave at 12. And that reflects the fact that I know Dibes disagrees with me. I don't know where Shane would land on this, and his list kind of tells me a little bit, but I think wide receiver is the number 1 need for the Philadelphia Eagles right now. I think it's or I don't know if I should say it's the number 1 need. What I should say is, if they walk out of day 1 and day 2 without taking a wide receiver, that to me would be a much bigger cardinal sin than not taking any other position. Like, if you walk out of day 1 or day 2 without a defensive lineman, but you fill every other thing, I would understand it. If you walk out without a corner, I'd be like, ooh, that's tough. But I understand it. If you walk out without a linebacker, I think that's what's going to happen anyway. But wide receiver, if they don't take one in specifically round 1 or 2 for me, but round 1, 2, or 3 that can step in and play right away, I think that would be a massive miss, and it would be unfair to Jalen Hurts. It'd be unfair to Nick Sirianni, and I think it'd be unfair to letting this offense progress. They really need actually, I should have led with this. It'd be unfair to Devontae Smith. Let's give this guy an NFL receiver to play next to and see what happens when the defense doesn't have to entirely focus on him. And it'll help Dallas Goedert as well. I think that if you get another receiver, and especially if you get one of these 4 that I just named here, if you get a top flight receiver, and I know the funny part about receiver is we all have it ranked differently, and that's the fun part about this position. But if you get one of these top flight receivers, they're going to be able to play right away. And you have an interesting weapon, like an interesting crew of weapons there with Smith, a Williams, London, or Burks, Olave, Wilson, whatever you want to say. And then Dallas Goedert, that really gives you maybe not a top 15 trio of weapons in the NFL. Like, I think it enters you in the conversation depending on how good the rookie is. So that's why I might have, Williams, London, Burks, and Olave a little bit higher than you'll see them in other places. Or, I guess London you will see in the top 10 a lot of places. So Shane, you have Williams or you have Burks at 8 and Williams at 11. They're the only 2 that make your top 13 here. Why do you like those 2 so much more than the others?
With Treylon Burks, I just see his size and his athleticism. And I know he didn't run that well at the combine, and I just don't care. In week 3, the guy hit the fastest speed recorded in college football this year. And by the way, it was faster than any NFL player hit this year as well. Wow. So he's got speed.
I didn't know that.
He has, 22.7 miles an hour, I think it was. And the only player that's hit that in the last 2 years was Jonathan Taylor, who hit it twice in 2020. So he's got the long speed. He's not a great route runner, but he can separate vertically because of his speed. And because teams have to respect that, he can also separate on like hitch routes. Those were the 2 routes he got the most separation on, 9 routes and hitches. 20% of his touches were manufactured behind the line of scrimmage. And despite that, he still has the 2nd highest yards per reception among the big 5 receivers. And his yards after the catch per reception only trail Jamison Williams by 1/10 of a yard. So this guy, he makes people miss. If he can't make you miss, he runs through you. He's a raw route runner. I think he can figure that out. If he can't figure that out, at worst, you still just have a guy you can send out for 9 balls and you can give jet sweeps and screens for, and he's going to get you, 800-900 yards a year. So I'm really high on Burks. And then Jamison Williams is just the whole package. He is not as unique in his size, his athletic traits as Burks is. He's a better all-around player. So I would love either one of those guys. And I do agree, the Eagles have to walk out with a receiver. The worst thing you could do is get to the end of this season and say, well, I don't know where we are with Jalen Hurts. Mm-hmm. And can you really fairly assess it if the only receiver he had – and he's got Quez Watkins. He's a wide receiver 3. Just imagine, though. Imagine Devontae Smith gets hurt early in the year and the Eagles don't draft a receiver. Can you really evaluate Jalen Hurts throwing to Quez Watkins, Jalen Reagor, and Zach Pascal? They have to get a receiver. They're a little bit further down my board here because I think they're so close in the top 5, and I really like George Pickens as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that pushed him a little bit down my board, not because I dislike the receivers, but because I guess I would rather take one of these more scarce positions at 15 and then fall back to a receiver at 18, all things equal.
I think Dives is going to touch on that heavily, and also I'm going to have him really talk about London and break him down a little bit. But I'm shifting into tough cover radio show host mode here. But Shane, real quick question for you on Treylon Burks. I know you're really high on him. I'm high on him as well. I have him at 11 here. What's the comp for him that you kind of see from the NFL? I've heard names like Thibodeaux because of the way that they use him behind the line of scrimmage. I've heard names like AJ Brown and DK Metcalf due to his freakish kind of athleticism and body and frame. Who do you see when you see Treylon Burks?
So the Ringer, I'm going to steal this from them because I thought it was great.
They do a good job. Yeah.
They comped Treylon Burks to Thibodeaux with a power-up mushroom. And I just think, I think he's a lot like Thibodeaux and how he can be utilized, but he's bigger, faster, stronger. Like, I think this is a guy that he can do a little bit of everything for you. And I mean, yeah, he's not going to come in and run the best routes for you right away. I'm just not that concerned about that. I think you can develop that. You can't develop the speed, the physical traits that he has. And by the way, he can win jump balls too. So
there's no DK there though. The bad route running, the jump ball.
Yeah, I see more DK than Thibodeaux for me.
That's who I always saw when I kind of tuned in, and
Thibodeaux's more twitchy. Like Thibodeaux can like I don't see that with Treylon. I see Treylon more like DK.
But I missed on DK. I saw the route running and I was like, I can't do it. This route running is so terrible. I overvalued that, and I definitely learned from that. And this is kind of my repenting for that a little bit with Treylon Burks, because I think that there's a ton of DK Metcalf in him. Shane or Joe Chick's busting on us because he's a Falcons fan. They always have good receivers and we have bad ones. We get it, Joe. Julio,
they have great receivers that
Calvin Ridley gambles
for a year for gambling on.
Hey man, I stand with Calvin Ridley as a gambling man, but Drake London, Dives, talk about him.
I mean, the NFL is a mismatched league, man. Like I nailed him as my number one wide receiver, like literally in December. That was one of my first January. That was one of my first videos, position rankings. It was edge and wide receiver. And wide receiver, I loved what I saw from Drake London this past year. He played a lot of slot 2 years ago, was primarily outside this year. I mean, the NFL is a mismatched league, man. This guy can absolutely dominate you in the slot, on the outside. Yes, he's a contested catch guy. Yes, a lot of Eagles fans still have the nightmares of Nelson Aguilar from USC and J-Jaw and the contested catch concept of a wide receiver. But for me, I think pound for pound, like 6'5", like this guy is extremely talented. I want to see more movement, pre-snap movement, guys moving around, especially Devontae in the slot on the outside for this Eagles offense next year. I just see him being a really good fit. So yeah, it sucks. It really sucks he didn't run the 40 at his pro day last week. It really sucks. I was really looking forward to that. How he gets separation is a major thing, and I can't deny that. That's pretty much what all Eagles fans are looking at. Can he create separation off the line? Really, the truth of the matter is, he's going to have to you're probably going to have to move him pre-snap a little bit. So for me, I really like Drake London, and I think he will probably be like one of those boomer bust selections in this draft.
So I have a very fun reason for why people.
It's like a Mike Evans. I see him as a Mike Evans.
100%. I totally agree. That's exactly who I have too. I literally have. If you could see my notes, it says he plays so much. He plays so much like Mike Evans. He plays above the rim, and this is the point I wanted to get to. The reason he's not J-Jaw, and the reason that his contested catch radius and all that is real. Drake London, he put up 29 and 14 as a basketball player.
He's a power forward. He's a power forward.
He was on the USC basketball team before the football team was like, hey, man, we can't be having that. You got to come focus on football. But this guy was literally about to play college basketball. You want to know? So this guy was 29 and 14, like I said, as a high school senior. You want to know what JJ Arcega-Whiteside was as a high school senior for his college basketball team? He averaged 0.4 points per game, 0.6 assists per game and 0.4 rebounds per game. Dude played like 10 minutes. Dude couldn't get on the floor. He was on his varsity high school basketball team. Dude went to like D1 for football, and he couldn't get on the floor for basketball. We should have always known. Howie should have saw the high school basketball stats and been like, this guy, I can't have this. So that's why Drake London's athleticism is real. He's fast. He's twitchy. He's a basketball player. Put him on the Sixers. Put him on the Eagles. Put Bo Jackson situation.
Yeah, I have this like image of like Nick Sirianni finding that mismatch of Drake London on a linebacker or something, and just literally like Bill Belichicking the shit out of that and just going to him. Like you need a wide receiver. Let's be honest, guys. Jalen Hurts isn't the most accurate quarterback. Short, intermediate, down the field. You need a guy like Drake London that can catch everything, and he's the guy that can jump up above everyone and bring it down.
And I think that's part of why Shane likes Treylon Burks as well. I think
I agree.
That mold as well.
You're going to see Treylon Burks really soon.
But real quick tidbit before we move on to our next ranking, our next last part of the list here. Drake London, you did hear the rumors with Nick Sirianni. Nick Sirianni, he was having people shoot on the net at the combine. If Drake London got a chance with a little Nerf basketball, he was lights out. So maybe that moved him up the Eagles big board. Maybe Drake London's who we're gonna end up with. I think he'll probably be off the board. But
no, I think so. Going back, you kind of mentioned about the wide receiver position. I think the wide receiver position, the edge rusher position, is the top two positions in this draft. I think the edge position at the top is the best, the cream of the crop. The wide receiver position in that middle to second round is so deep, so good. Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson, David Bell, George Pickens. The list goes on and on. Sky Moore. There's so many guys that will be available at pick 51 for the Eagles. Maybe they have to move up a little bit. That's why I'm really in favor of like trading back with pick 18 that give you a little more ammo to move up to get a wide receiver or a safety or whatever in that second round and one of these wide receivers. So that's why I have some of these cornerbacks and edge guys higher than some of these wide receivers.
I can totally get behind that.
Joe Ciccoletti chimes in and says J-Jaw's getting more minutes, points, and rebounds than Ben Simmons did this year with the Sixers.
So good.
Let me real quick say something about Drake London, and he's going to show up here on my last part of the list. Let's go ahead and reveal that. When we did our initial wide receiver rankings, Drake London was my wide receiver 2. And I said my concern with him was his speed. His ability to separate. I think he runs good routes. I don't think he separates that great. And I think a lot of it goes back to speed. Great contested catch guy. He led the NCAA in contested catches this year despite only playing 8 games, which is just insane. The problem for me and why he fell down my board is not running the 40 at his pro day. I think it was the right decision for him not to run it, but I needed him to check that sub 4.6 box. If he ran at his pro day and he ran sub 4.6, he would still be my wide receiver 2 behind Treylon Burks. But I'm just concerned about that, and you can't fully tell on tape, and he didn't run. And so that's why he fell a little bit here for me, because I do have a little bit of concerns. I still think he's going to be a good player, but it is a red flag for me. So that's where I'm at with Drake London, and that's the discrepancy between the wide receiver podcast where I put him 2 and here where he's at number 17 on my board and the 4th wide receiver.
Did my basketball point change your mind at all, though? He was a stud.
No.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next.
Well, was it TJ Houshmandzadeh? Is that the
TJ Who's Your Mama?
Who's Your Mama is he's been his trainer, and he's saying I think he said he would be in the 4.4 40 range, but that's all hearsay. So at the end of the day, I don't believe any of that.
So I'm not too concerned with he has 18 catches over 20 yards, so I'm not too concerned with his speed, or at least as concerned as others are with all the other traits that he brings. I think that it'll be more than enough with the ability to go up and catch balls. But so moving on to our next part of our rankings here. At 14, Dives has wide receiver Treylon Burks. At 15, he's got cornerback Cairo Elam. At 16, he's got wide receiver Chris Olave. At 17, he's got wide receiver Garrett Wilson. At 18, he's got safety Jaquan Brisker. At 14, Shane has Jermaine Johnson, Chris Olave at 15, Devin Lloyd at 16, Drake London at 17, Daxton Hill at 18, and I have Jermaine Johnson at 14, Trayvon Walker at 15, Jordan Davis at 16, Daxton Hill at 17, and Jaquan Brisker at 18. Jermaine Johnson, Trayvon Walker, and Jordan Davis are all kind of a tier for me of like freak athletes that I'm lower than consensus on and I'm kind of willing to miss. But if the Eagles were to take one of those guys, it'd be pretty easy to talk me into him because of the freak athleticism there with those three guys and the upsides that are pretty apparent with all three guys due to the traits that they have. So I understand, all the reasons for why you guys have him higher. I guess Shane's right with me on Jermaine Johnson at 14. But I guess a question that I wanted to ask to Dibes, because we don't have him on our list. Cairo Elam, number 15 for you, cornerback out of Florida. I was surprised to see him make your list here. I think that's, I think that you're a little bit of an outlier there in terms of having him this high. Actually, I shouldn't say that. There's someone else in our Painted Lines group chat that was pretty high on him as well. But what made him, or why would you be happy with the Eagles taking him at 15 or 18?
This is where position need kind of takes everything here. So for me, the Eagles absolutely need to bring in an outside corner. And after this group is where it truly drops. I think Cairo Elam has absolutely number one cornerback potential at the next level. He's got great anticipation. You look at his career, he's got tons of interceptions, tons of passes defended. He's got elite length, speed, fluid hips. Cairo Elam is a pure outside corner. And then, but after this, it's a lot of a lot of raw prospects, a lot of like slot prospects, a lot of guys that have potential down the road, developmental guys. So while the cornerback position is really good, it's really important for the Eagles to make sure, it's really important for Howie to know, A, when the cornerback position when that run will start, and B, when that wide receiver run will start. Because I think those two positions are really strong, but it gets to a point, especially I think in that like top or mid second round, where there was a cliff drop of the top guys, and you're not going to get kind of some of the top guys in this draft. So it's really upon Howie to kind of read a lot of these teams and make a really smart decision. But I think you look at, Cairo Elam, like tape-wise, he shut down John Mechie, who is, I think, probably a day two guy in this draft. Cairo Elam has the intangibles. He has the production. He has the stats. I think he's a sure thing. And then after that, I'm really nervous. Like, I'm not as high on Trent McDuffie. Sorry, Shane. As an outside corner, number 2 corner, now that Steven Nelson is gone.
So we're wrapping up here a little bit at this point, but a guy that I was kind of another guy I was surprised to see as high on someone's list here, Shane, with Chris Olave at 15, because I know that Shane had voiced concerns specifically about his fit with the Eagles before. Are those still prevalent with you, or have they kind of washed away a little bit? Because I wasn't expecting him to see him as your number 3 wide receiver, or in your top 15 for the Eagles. So kind of walk me through Chris Olave being 15 on your board for the Birds.
I think Olave is a little redundant with Devonta Smith. I think in an ideal world, you want to build your wide receiver room like a basketball team. You've got different roles, different guys that do different things. And I think Olave wins very similarly to Devonta Smith. I think physically he's a lot like Devonta Smith. And so you're committing to having a pretty light wide receiver room, but forcing for a specific type of receiver is how you select Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. It's how you select J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf. And so at the end of the day, I think Olave is a very talented receiver, and I have him slightly above London now because of the speed concerns. I wouldn't be upset with either pick. So I just think Olave is a good player. He's a really good player with a high floor, and maybe the fit with Devonta Smith isn't ideally what you would want, but also ideally I don't want Jalen Reagor being the wide receiver 2 next year. So I'd be cool with Chris Olave.
Jalen Reagor never tested as well as Chris Olave, though. Like Chris Olave.
I'm not comparing him to Rager at all. I just saying that I think trying to pigeonhole to we need a specific type of receiver is how you make those bad picks. And so
I think
he fits the art. He is the worst fit for the Eagles out of the big four, but he's such a good player that does it really matter?
I think it was one of the biggest. Yeah, I think it was one of the biggest wins of the combine. His 40 speed was absolutely terrific. That opened, I think, everyone's eyes that maybe he could be more than just a slot guy. Maybe he could be more of a, stretch the defense on the outside kind of guy, X guy. I have him number 16 on my big board, above Garrett Wilson. And I love that you brought up the whole Reagor Jefferson thing, because I'm not going to lie, that goes through my brain literally all the time when I'm like looking at these wide receivers. Garrett Wilson is an absolute stud, but he's kind of in that same boat, like beast in the slot. At the end of the day, I want best player available, and then that's not going to stop me, regardless of Devontae Smith. So yeah, I think beggars can't be choosers. The Eagles' wide receivers are so bad that I'll bring in pretty much everyone at this point.
I think we can wrap it up here with a little conversation on the two safeties that are showing up at the bottom of our list here. At least one of them each for you guys, and then both of them for me. I've got Daxton Hill at 17 and Jaquan Brisker at 18. Dobbs has Brisker at 18, while Shane has Hill at 18. So I view these guys as like trade back options. Like if you're going to trade back into the bottom of the first or the top of the second with 18, then these are guys that I would look at that I both think are guys who walk in and are NBA starters right away. I think that these are guys who have high upsides. They can do everything that in modern NBA safety needs to do. I think both of them are guys who would fit with the Eagles really well.
Yeah, don't give me hope, Mark, because we're walking in the same boat here where the Eagles won't take one of these guys. And I actually have Jalen Petrie above Daxton Hill, and that's not a knock on Daxton Hill, but I have Jalen Petrie as my kind of honorable mention that didn't make this list. But for me, Jaquan Brisker is just an uber athlete, super, super physical safety, kind of fills that versatile safety that can really dominate in the box. 6'1", 203 pounds, super fluid, just head on a swivel, hips on a swivel type of guy. So I think Jaquan Brisker would be an absolute home run pick. And I agree, Mark, definitely among my favorite trade down scenarios where you maybe have an extra second round pick, get him in the top of the second round. Jaquan Brisker is a stud. I said that. I think I said stud more times in any show that I've ever had in this show.
So here's the RAS comparison scores for Hill and Brisker. You can see they're both rated very well as athletes. For me, the difference here is he's faster, he's more agile. His 3-cone and shuttle were incredible, and he's 2 years younger than Brisker as well, 21 versus 23, which in such a close scenario, because I've got these guys very close, that can kind of become a tiebreaker. I like, Hill both of them can do a lot of the same things. They can get into the box, they can get into the slot, they can play from single high. Hill played more from single high than Brisker did, which doesn't really matter for the Eagles because they're not really trying to do that much right now. Now, to be clear, I would be upset with Daxton Hill at 18. I think that's too high for him. I think you trade back and get this guy, like you guys are saying, into the first round, beginning of the second. Now, why is he at 18 on my board if I would be upset taking him at 18? Well, because there's going to be 2 quarterbacks. There's going to be 4 offensive tackles, maybe a couple offensive guards that come off the board. So those guys are going to get pushed down. So I would be upset if Hill was the pick at 18, but I do really like him. I also really like Petrie. I like Brisker. I would love to get one of those guys, early day 2.
Daxton Hill is just such a monster off the line of scrimmage, man. Like his ability to attack the quarterback is undeniable. Brisker's a little more physical, I think. I think Brisker's a little bit better in coverage. I could be wrong there. It's just my feeling. But I think both guys, are right in that same area. Same with Jalen Petrie in that like bottom first round, high second round area that would make so much sense for the Eagles. So much sense that it's probably not going to happen. And it makes me nauseous.
I'm losing an absolute nightmare of a basketball bet right now. So I'm just about ready to wrap this up. Oh my God. Oh man.
So for the people that are not watching this on YouTube, maybe you're listening to the podcast, let me recap here. I'm going to go off of our consensus big board, which I did off of our average placements. So on average, this is how we have, guys. 1, safety Kyle Hamilton. 2, Kayvon Thibodeaux. 3, Sauce Gardner. 4, Aiden Hutchinson. 5, Derrick Stingley. 6, George Karloftis. 7, Andrew Booth. 8, Jordan Davis. 9, Trayvon Walker. 10, Jamison Williams. 11, Treylon Burks. 12, Jermaine Johnson. 13, Devin Lloyd. 14, Drake London. 15, Chris Olave. 16, Malik Willis. 17, Trent McDuffie. And 18, Daxton Hill. So that is our big board, what we would like to see for the Eagles in the first round, maybe the early second round come draft night. I'm going to post this out on Twitter. So if you are listening to a podcast version of this, you can check my Twitter. I'll have it up there. I'll retweet it from the Painted Lines too, so you guys can see it. And you can feel free to hit us up on Twitter if you've got any questions about it. So hour and 20 minutes. We've gone far longer than I thought we would. Before we wrap this up, Dives, do you got any final thoughts you want to get out here?
No. NFL Draft Watch Party, first round, day 2, Thursday and Friday. Next Thursday and Friday, we'll be doing a watch party, breaking it down, man. I'm telling you, it's going to be so much fun. We have so many notes, so many graphics, so many video highlights. It's going to be absolutely bananas. So if you want to learn about the NFL Draft, even if you're not an Eagles fan, man, it's going to be a wild ride. Like my man Shane's about to drop the most epic spreadsheet of all time, and I can't wait for that to happen as well. So top to bottom, we have everything covered. Everything covered. If you're a Chargers fan or if you're a Lions fan, it's all right here, man. Just it's been a blast, and I'm stressed out. I'm stressed.
Heaven forbid if you're a Cowboys, Giants, or Commanders fan, we'll still have talk for you guys. So everybody, come hang out. Doesn't matter who your team is. We've got the team needs down for everybody. We've got the player profiles. We're gonna do our best NFL Network impersonation and just.
It's my favorite.
So, our draft show may swell in size as we hit the Eagles picks, but we're gonna talk about all the teams, all the picks. So come hang out with us. It was so much fun last year. It's where this podcast was actually born last year. Was out of that draft party. So come and hang out with us.
We definitely need to do a segment on like draft grades and all that stuff.
Yeah. I don't think we want to ask Mark for his final thoughts.
Oh my God. I keep losing bets by a half point on a nightly basis. It's just
I can't imagine.
Oh my God. Yep, they're not gonna fail.
I bet it feels similar to drafting Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
My God.
Missed it by one spot. All right, let's get you guys out of here. Thank you, as always, for episode number 56, I think it was, of Chalk Talk. Those of you that were here live in the comments, Joe, all you guys, thank you for doing that. If you're not listening, if you're listening to the archive, be sure you smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. We'll have at least one, maybe two more podcasts coming your way before the watch party, so stay tuned to Twitter for announcements about those. Give us a follow on Twitter. I'm at _TPL. Dibes is at Mr. Crockpot, and Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. And so from me, from Mark, from Dibes, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.